Welcome to another episode of the BS Podcast, the show that looks at how behavioural change insights are being applied in the wild. Episodes feature renowned behavioural experts across industries and organisations, from management and marketing to policy and public health, and more. Let's dive in and see what all the BS is about. Here's your host from The Behaviourist, Nick Hobson.
Hello, BS listeners, and welcome back to the show. I am really excited to have on someone you might have heard before by the name of BJ Fogg. BJ is a behavior scientist with deep experience in innovation and teaching. At Stanford University, he's directed a research lab for over 20 years. On the industry side, BJ trains innovators to use his work so they can create solutions that influence behavior for good. The focus areas include health, sustainability, financial well-being, learning, productivity, and more. In 2002, he published a book entitled Persuasive Technology about how computers can be designed to influence attitudes and behaviors. At the same time, publication of this book was mostly ignored. Now, almost 20 years later, the predictions and warnings about persuasive technology were surprisingly accurate. In 2009, BJ's research interests moved away from persuasive technology toward human behavior in general, especially health habits. This led to creating a new set of models and methods that comprise what he calls behavior design, something my listeners might have heard before. Yeah. In Jan 2020, he shared 300 pages of new and practical uses for behavior design in a New York Times bestselling book called Tiny Habits. Today, he devotes about half his time to Stanford and half to industry teaching and innovation. For him, and this is my favorite part, working in both worlds makes sense. His Stanford work makes him better in industry, and what he learns in industry improves his Stanford research. So, BJ, welcome to the show.
Nick, thank you for inviting me.
It is so great to have you, and we had a real fun time for the last 10 minutes just trying to sort out technology. So if that is any indication, I think this is going to be a fun chat.
We bonded over technology challenges. I like that.
A shared aversive experience. I think that's a thing in psychology, right?
Yeah, I think you orchestrated that. So I would be more forthcoming, and I would trust you more, and I'd reveal all sorts of secrets I've never revealed before.
You're on to me.
Bam.
Shit. Oh no.
I'm good with that. That's fine with me.
You are a psychologist after all. So let's get into it. I always like to start with personal story of mine because I'm sort of vain like that and egocentric. So
That's something else we have in common too. Yeah, keep going.
So with this whole thing of COVID, I work from home and I sit in the same office that you're looking at over video, and I sort of walk down a set of flight of stairs, which you might actually hear my daughter in the background because she's home from nursery, and I go from quote unquote work to home life, and it takes all of a 20-second commute down my stairs, and that just led to this sort of very sedentary lifestyle. I wasn't getting out, I wasn't exercising, so and eating habits and too many casual beers, and I gained weight. And so I was like, I'm going to lose some weight and get back into shape, which I've said to myself many times before. And so I decided to actually start what I used to train back in the day was with Olympic lifting, and it's sort of called Olympic lifting. And it's this really fun sort of version of powerlifting or weightlifting. And I'm not going to get into the details, but anyways, I was doing it, and I had a trainer who was actually a former student of mine. And at first I was sort of there. My motivation was a little bit there, but it kind of waned and decreased over time. And then last week I had a session. I'm having weekly sessions, and I sort of hit a personal best. It's sort of just with this style of weightlifting, it's a lot of like, yes, thank you. It's a lot of technique, and I sort of just got it. It sort of clicked, and not surprising, my motivation increased from there.
Nice.
So with that, we all know you're the expert on habits and habit formation and behavior change. What do you think, just to sort of ease our way into it, how would you explain what happened to me there? And if you had to predict, would you say that I'm destined for success in my weight training habit?
Yes.
Go on.
Okay. Nick and I joked before we turned on the recorder that I would give very short answers or long answers or whatever. I thought your story was going a different direction. I thought you were going to say, I started and I didn't see the pounds come off and what went wrong. And I was going to say, well, did you feel successful? And you were going to say, no, I didn't. And I said, that's what went wrong. But your story went the other direction. You felt successful. You had this breakthrough. And that increased motivation to continue. So I think, so the key to lasting change, there's two, is helping yourself do what you already want to do and the feeling of success. The feeling of success wires in the habit. I talk about that in my book, Tiny Habits. It's not repetition, everybody, that creates the habit. It's the emotion that you feel. And so with this breakthrough, and you probably had ongoing kind of echoes of that after you kind of figured out whatever this thing was you figured out. So it helps wire in the habit of doing that in a certain way and increases your motivation. That's why my one-word answer is yes, at least on the weight training. Now, it's an open question. How much does actually weight training lead to weight loss? And so there's a caveat there. But in terms of a one-word answer, I'm just going to say yes to. Good for you. Keep going. Keep going. And,
hey, thanks.
Yeah.
And for me, because I'm, as a psychologist who understands and this stuff, you'd think that we would be the best people to initiate and start habits, but it turns out I'm just like every other human, and I've had many failed attempts in the past. It's not. You'd think we'd have privileged, sort of access to this knowledge.
So funny. I've never talked about this except with my own students at Stanford, and I've said, "Hey, look. Yes, you were great at cramming. Yes, you were great at writing papers. Yes, you were great at taking tests. And you're used to shortcuts. You're used to being the exception. But when it comes to behavior change, you are not. You are normal. You are like everybody else. So don't think that you can cram or take a shortcut to behavior change, because that doesn't correlate with the other things that got you into Stanford."
That is really interesting. So let's go back to this idea of, which is almost I'd say like an axiom of yours and what is repeated in Tiny Habits and your work that it's inspired from. So helping people feel successful. This idea of self-efficacy, or sort of a self-signaling mechanism, whatever we want to call it. It's sort of this property that a person sees themselves perform an ideal or some sort of optimal behavior, and no matter how small or tiny, if you will. And they say to themselves at that point, once they've completed, I did that, good on me. And that's the sort of confidence that they need to swing the momentum that then motivates them to the next step and to the next step and to the next step. So when we lay it out like that, and when I read your work and when I hear you talk about this stuff, it seems so patently obvious, almost like stupidly obvious. And yet, as we know, here we are, with the eternal struggle of behavior change and habits.
So many people confused. Yeah, it is. It's, again, funny you would ask that. So everything in my book, Tiny Habits, builds off of the thousands and thousands of people that I coached in the Tiny Habits method and studied the impact and varied and ran experiments and all of this, except for the chapter that maybe the most important chapter, which is entitled Emotions Create Habits. I'm not an expert on emotions. And I knew the Tiny Habits method of celebration, where you self-reinforce using an emotion. I knew that worked because I'd done that for myself. I taught it to other people. I had run experiments on people that celebrated versus people that didn't, and the celebrators did way better. So I knew it worked. But I wanted to explain the psychology of what was going on. And I read tons and tons of stuff on positive emotions and so on. I mean, Nick, I kid you not, it was a stack of 18 inches tall of academic work. And I was going through all this. And then one day I called up James Gross, who's a professor at Stanford and emotions guy. He came to Stanford from Berkeley. He was a brand new professor. I took his class. I was like his first student. So I called him up and I was like, James, here's what's going on. I have this thing called celebration, which is a way to cause a positive emotion, and it helps wire in the habit. And I need to be able to explain this from an academic scientific perspective. And I started explaining some of these, really kind of sophisticated neuroscience things. And he's like, no, it's just simpler than that. You found a clever way to help people self-reinforce. It's reinforcement. That's the long and short of it. People are self-reinforcing. And I was like, that's what I thought. But I felt like I had to go to all this, complicated neuroscience stuff. And so, yeah, what you're doing to wire in a habit quickly, you are self-reinforcing by creating a positive emotion on demand. And in Tiny Habits, we call that celebration. And so you don't leave that positive emotion to chance. Yes, it happens. It happens. So if I were to, let's say a pretty simple example, I use a new type of pen and it helps my writing be much clearer and smoother and easier. I feel successful with that new pen, then using the new pen is going to wire in as a habit because I have this emotional response like, oh my gosh, my handwriting's. So that happens sort of naturally. And the habit wires in naturally. But in Tiny Habits, you don't just leave it to chance. You deliberately self-reinforce. So when James Gross said that, it was frankly a huge relief, Nick. It was like, yeah, it's straightforward. And once you see it that way, it's really obvious. Now, let me gloss that a little bit with this. Years ago, I thought of calling it self-reinforcement. So the technique is celebration. And we looked at other words for it, but it's something you do to create a positive emotion. And then I looked up in the literature, and you're going to be familiar with this. I looked up self-reinforcement, and it was used a lot in the 70s and extended a little bit to the 80s. And you would think it was used to mean like an immediate way that you reward. I'm using that as a technical word. You reward yourself, but they didn't use it that way. They used it in a couple of ways, including, and this included Albert Bandura, one of my idols. He writes articles talking about self-reinforcement as, you do XYZ for 30 days, and then you self-reinforce by going to the movie. That's not exactly his example, but it's something like that. And it's like, no, that's not what I'm talking about. That's like an incentive design. That's not self-reinforcement. So I felt like academics had already used the phrase self-reinforcement to mean something different that I wasn't talking about. So I felt like, well, I can't use that phrase. So I avoided it. But then chapter 2, act 2, maybe this is, but then when I had a chance, and so my paperback version of Tiny Habits is coming out, and it's like, yeah, you can tweak things. If there's typos, there's small, teeny, tiny problems, you can tweak it. So I was like, I'm going to reclaim self-reinforcement, self-reinforce. Forget what happened in the 70s. They kind of screwed up by using that term. It's exactly the right term for what we're talking about here. It makes it clear that it's just, it's a straightforward process of presenting an immediate benefit or a sense of success. And so I reclaimed it. So in the paperback version, and these were just small changes here and there, I bring back that word and that concept. And so that's what you're doing in Tiny Habits. You're deliberately reinforcing, and you're doing it yourself. So the behavior becomes more automatic, becomes a habit.
Very cool. So my question was, is it how you're separating it from, those psychologists in the 70s? Is it that it's more psychologically immediate? Like it's right up as opposed to long term? Yes.
The problem is, and it's the same problem I have with the word reward and how it's used today, is too often people think of, the reward is after I do this for 30 days or 2 weeks, or after I finish the book, then I'm going to reward myself with an ice cream cone. Well, that's fine, but technically the word reward does not mean something that you get at the end of a process. It's something that happens immediately, something that serves to reinforce the behavior. So a better term for something like after I reach a milestone might be incentive or prize. And we're making a mistake by using the word reward to mean something that's just proximally, like as I'm writing with the pen, the reward is my handwriting is looking better and it's easier to do versus some prize down the road. They serve different functions. We should not be using the same word for those. And we're doing that with the word reward, which is why I don't think it's a good technical term anymore. I talk about it a little bit in Tiny Habits, and it can create confusion because an incentive that you get 30 days later or whatever will not wire in the habit. It will motivate you, perhaps, but it doesn't serve the purpose of rewiring your brain.
Yeah. And does it matter the type of emotion that you are?
I like that question. Yes.
Because as we know, like there's different types of,
Yeah.
positive affect.
Yeah. And it's complicated. As you know, the world of
Mm.
emotions has long been in disarray and argument, and now it's even worse. The whole field has exploded,
I
just
know.
like in critical theory had come in and just exploded the field of English and literature.
Yeah.
It's a mess. And I don't want to dive into that. But to your question, I think of it in two ways. As you're doing the behavior, you experience a positive emotion. And I have people focus on the emotion of success, the feeling of being successful, but it could be pleasure. It could be something that's funny. So anything positive that you associate can do it. But how do you hack pleasure or how do you hack comedy in a moment? I don't know how to do that, but you can cause yourself to feel successful. The other type would be a negative emotion that gets alleviated. And in this case, it would be like relief. And when you experience relief, that wires in habits. If you look at some reasons that people smoke or drink or go to social media, they're looking for relief from anxiety or boredom or something like that. And that's what's wiring it in. But it's hard to make that a practical thing. Like in this moment that you are pouring a glass of water, feel relief. That's hard. In this moment, you're pouring a glass of water, cause yourself to feel successful. That is something you can do. Now, so this year we started the Tiny Habits Research Lab, and this is one of the research questions. Can we find a way, a method for people to feel relief on demand? And let's compare that against people feeling success on demand and see what happens.
And which one's stronger? In my notes for preparation, like I did a little bit of work on regulatory fit and promotion prevention mindset. So when I was reading, familiar with your work, I've often thought, does the behavior is specific, that the ideal behavior is specific to either the relief or prevention versus the success or promotion. Do you think there are individual differences such that some people respond better to one versus the other?
I would think there are. I haven't studied it myself. And the study of this, which would probably fall under behaviorism, back in the day, I mean, because this is where it happened, which, as you know, got pushed out of the academy to a large extent. But my friends in their 70s, I have one friend who in his 70s did his doctorate back in the day, and he ran the rats and the pigeons and all that. So he would know the answer very much. But the funny thing he said to me, I think he actually said on Twitter, actually, was that urinating can be a reward because you're getting relief. And I was like, okay, I've already said after I pee, I'll do 2 push-ups, but I'm not going to say now do the habit and then urinate, or urinate while you're doing the habit to wire in the habit. But people like that they've looked at this up and down and up and down. So he would know. It's unfortunate that perspective on behavior is not really taught very widely, as far as I can tell, even though I don't buy into all of it, because we're not just black boxes. We do have emotions, we do have cognition, but I think there's a lot of insight there that has gotten lost over the decades.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I sort of named my own company the Behaviorist after being inspired by those OG, or what I call the OG behaviorists, like, Skinner. Yeah. But of course, being trained I was trained in affective neuroscience and social neuroscience.
Which the behaviorists would totally reject.
Exactly. So I'm like clearly struggling with my identity as a scientist and researcher.
Reclaim the word behaviorist to mean something not, Skinner and everybody who's running those kinds of studies.
Exactly. So what happens when a habit becomes a part of, like, so sort of endemic, so core to an individual? Like, there's a lot of things happening, but it seems like one of those things that's happening is it's becoming part of their identity. There's sort of like that element of this is who I am and I do blank, or I am blank. What can you say about identity and habit formation and how that can be used to play into the whole behavior change piece?
Yeah, I've talked about this for years. So I started teaching the Tiny Habits method in 2011 after 8-10 months of just hacking my own behavior and doing some things in a limited way. And it was about 3 years later, I decided to start measuring identity change. So the Tiny Habits program I launched at the beginning, and we still offer it, is a free 5-day program where people work on 3 habits that are super tiny in a certain way. And on Saturday and Sunday, that's when I evaluate. I love evaluating how did it go. And then I added because this was email coaching. So I was coaching hundreds of people a week, anywhere from 200 to 500 people a week over email, which is pretty time intensive. But I would get all these emails and questions and responses and reactions. And so it wasn't quantitative, but it was qualitative in mass, week after week after week. And then, the email wasn't quantitative. The measures at the end of the week were, except the question I added that it went like this, after doing Tiny Habits, I now see I'm the kind of person who, and they would fill in the blank. They would complete the sentence. So that was my way to tap into what sense of identity shift did they have? And the vast majority, 90% plus, I'm the kind of person who can change. I'm the kind of person who can follow through. I'm the kind of person who has a systematic way to improve my life. Once in a while, rarely somebody says, I'm the kind of person that fails at everything, even tiny things, which is sad.
Right.
But so I sensed that. I started tapping into that. And what I didn't do was unpack the mechanism. But here's what I think it is. When people see evidence that they've changed in a certain way, I'm starting to eat healthy snacks, that evidence, they're seeing themselves do a new behavior, changes how they think about themselves. So it's the feeling of success, and it even works on tiny things. It doesn't have to be big thing. And that's what gets people to think of themselves differently in this new way. So there's this new identity that's emerging, which hinges on people feeling successful. And so that helped me understand the other results I was seeing week after week. The vast majority of people, even though they're only working on 3 new habits, the vast majority report changing other behaviors in their life. And I was like, well, why would they do that? Well, as their identity shifts, then when they encounter other eating situations or stress situations, they are going to behave more in line with that emerging identity. So it's that shift in identity. The hypothesis would be that's what drives the more global change. So that's what I think the mechanism looks like.
That's very cool. I buy it. Now
it makes total sense. It makes sense. Right? It would be hard to. Yeah. Now, to actually pin that down, yes, we could do it in a series of experiments, but experiments have limitations. You can't get the rich qualitative insights. So every research method has its limitations.
That's right. And I do want to touch on that. So I'm gonna flag this because I want to talk to you about this. I think it was I had a personality graduate seminar years ago, and we really honed in on this idea of the nomothetic versus the idiographic, and understanding human behavior through both perspectives. And I think social psychology, your typical laboratory experimental social psychologists, we really just focus on making wide sweeping claims about human behavior writ large, and we generalize and we extrapolate out our findings. You know what? I said I'm going to flag it, but let's just talk about it. So
let's go. Let's do it.
And then we'll circle back and we'll go every which direction. So there is this idea that we can understand humans on an individual level without generalizing, without sort of claiming universal principles. And then there's, like as I said, the more social psychologist laboratory approach, which is let's have a sample size of 100, have some sort of power analysis, and then find the data, and then make conclusions about humans.
Human nature. Yes.
Human nature. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Which is such a big claim we're now understanding with the replication crisis and all. But you are in this really interesting position where this is just my experience. You do both. You're an experimentalist in one regard. You are a PI at a lab, and you have students, and you have that whole thing going. But you also have the Tiny Habits, and before that, the coaching or the mentoring that you would have done with an individual and responding to these emails, like you said. So, first question on that note is, which version taught you more about human behavior?
Oh, you're getting right to the crux. You're going to get me into trouble with this one, Nick. I will confess, coaching hundreds of people week after week after week for 9 years gives you insight into how human habits work more than any set of laboratory experiments could.
I knew it. I knew you were going to say that.
Because there are patterns. And then eventually, once you see the patterns and you don't see exceptions to the patterns, it's like crystal clear. And so I feel lucky. I mean, I've always had like this weird, one foot in academics, 1 foot in the real world. Tiny Habits didn't start as an academic project. And I just feel like that combo of rigorous, experiments and the hands-on practice, not just with a few, with thousands of people, really had equipped me and gave me lots of confidence to ultimately write the book Tiny Habits and say, people, this is how it works. And what I love, one of my favorite people to teach. In fact, I just did a training today for 25 people who are in the trenches, helping people change behavior. And I love, love, love teaching those people, because if they've been in the trenches trying to change behavior, they have developed a sense of what works and what doesn't. And when I share my models and methods, there's a recognition of, yes, that's exactly it. I didn't have a way to think about it. I didn't have a way to structure it. I didn't have a language for it, but that's what's working. And these other things, these other theoretical academic things that, lived in a laboratory that I was trained to use didn't really work in the real world. And so it gives them such relief to have somebody with, I guess, a Stanford credential say, guess what? Let go of those old ways that you got trained in, because they're not that effective in the world. And here's how to think about, I guess in this case, what you're already doing to some extent. And here's how to build on that and optimize it. So there is, and this is why this question can get me into trouble, is, what we're doing in the social sciences is really hard. It's harder than the physical sciences. It's harder than rocket science. Because the variables are so hard to pin down and control and manipulate in a systematic way. So what we're doing is really, really hard. So let's not be too hard on social scientists, because we have the hardest, human beings, crazy hard. So, and I don't want to put that down, but what is, to your question, and I don't know what the motive is, but to your question is, oh my gosh, I learned so much during this week. Every single day I was coaching people in habits, hundreds of people, every single, well, except for Saturday and Sunday. That's when I looked at the results. And it just went on for years. My partner was like, well, I was on vacations, family reunions, on the plane. I had to coach hundreds of people every day. I didn't have to, I wanted to. And I just kept doing it. And then you really, it just becomes very clear about, these are the things that work. These are the things that don't matter. These are the things that work against succeeding.
And I guess the obvious answer is we need both ways to sort of understand, human nature and human behavior. We need the rigor of those basic researchers and the academics and that experimental laboratory work, but we also need that other stuff, whatever you want to call it. I guess it's kind of like the end.
And the rigorous work needs to be interpreted in the right way. So often, the headlines and the bloggers take something and they make a different claim, and then I'll just point to the study on repetition that people keep citing. Everybody go to Lally 2009, LALLY 2009, and just read the abstract. It does not say repetition creates habits. The study wasn't designed for that. But yet, if you type 66 days to create a habit, you will find so many people saying repetition creates the habit. That's not what the research says. So part of the problem is, the transference, accurately transferring. What did we learn from the rigorous research? And what does that mean in the real world? And that translation often gets messed up.
Yeah. And I always struggle with that translation piece, because that's the work, that's kind of like the work that I do. And you always run up against obstacles in like having a conversation with a client, for instance, or somebody who like an executive who's not a trained scientist, who has little interest in the robustness of a particular effect, and just wants results and money. And
Oh my gosh.
so, how do you, for me, how do we strike that balance between and I always tell this to people on my team, like incoming junior scientists, recent graduates of PhD programs, and I say, look, you're going to have to sacrifice some of that science, some of that rigor in favor of the communicability, or having it make sense to those key stakeholders.
Yeah.
Is there a
Ooh.
sweet spot in between there?
It's a real challenge. So let me start with this. First of all, in the social sciences, in behavior sciences, never use the word proven. Don't use the word proven. Anybody who's saying this is a proven way to do X, Y, Z,
red flag.
That's a red flag.
Yeah.
It suggests it, it connects with, but proven just isn't. I think a quality social scientist is not going to say it's proven. Of course, it's not proven. And so
sorry if I cut you off there. Just yesterday, this came up, and I was like, we can't in a deck. I was like, we have to take out proof. We can't talk about proof. And then I was like, so suggest. And then the other person, the commercial person's like, suggest. That is so like,
Yeah.
You're not sure.
My publisher wanted to put proven in this and that. It's like, no. I mean, we're looking at the null hypothesis here, which means you can't say proven. And I'm not going to go there, even though it would sell more books. Sure. There's a very, very, very popular habit book that's a proven way to break bad habits. That's not true at all. There's no proven way to break bad habits. But the bigger issue, so that's just one small thing, is let's not overstate what we can learn through social science methods. We can get insights, and we can, this suggests this, or this works better than that. Sure, we can do that. The surprise to me, and I've kind of said this, not publicly, is that this is going to get me in trouble again. The level of rigor of industry research is really shockingly low. And that's a problem, because people are creating products but it's getting better. And there are some really, really, really good industry researchers for sure. But as you know, people believe what they want to believe. So if somebody comes in with a poorly designed study and not really strong data, the people in charge of the product are going to want to believe it, and they're going to overlook the flaws. So some of the fallibility of human nature fits in and gets tangled in with, what kind of claims can we make from this research? And people often make much stronger claims than they should when it comes to business and industry, which is too bad. In terms of the rigor, there was a point where my Stanford lab tested a system of where we would match industry researchers with experimental psychologists from university, people who are really rigorous, and match them up with people that wanted to do rigorous studies of their product. And the idea there was, here are these academics. The only thing we get for academics is credit for ideas. We don't get paid well, but we know how to do research and we know how to think rigorously. Here are these people in industry who get paid a lot more, but they don't have the rigorous methods. So bring in the academics, pay them fairly well to bring the rigor to industry. And what we were looking at is a matchmaking service to do this. And we piloted it, and it got some interest. And then we handed it off to a government agency that seemed interested, and it didn't go any further than that. But there still, I think, is that need to match, scientific, especially social science research skills with things that industry needs to create successful products.
Yeah, that's really cool. Matchmaking. I love that. And I'm fortunate to be a part of this group called GABS, which just within the last month we're fairly new. And so it's the Global Association for Applied Behavioral Scientists.
Great.
And the whole thing, it's sort of inspired out of LSC and that master's program they have on behavior change. in behavioral science, to sort of do that, to sort of set a
Yeah.
technical and ethical minimum requirement so that students of behavioral science or psychology, social and behavioral sciences can say, maybe I'm not going to stay within the academy. And as we know, there's way too many PhD students for the number of openings of faculty positions. But maybe I can be a behavioral scientist or a psychologist in industry and not sell my soul, not give up
Yeah.
my training
Yeah.
as a scientist. And so, as you said, it's getting better. And, I've been doing this now for not long, only 4 years since leaving academia. And in that time, I've seen strides being taken, which is really great. And I think the more of the sort of the scientists or the people who think like scientists we find in organizations, especially at top levels within senior management and executive, even like they're talking about the chief behavioral officer. The more we get those internal champions who are talking about this stuff and bringing it up in conversation, I think we're going to get there eventually.
Yeah. Well,
Good.
and that's both good news and bad. I think the good news is for products that help people be happier and healthier, we can make those products more effective. The bad news is if you're working for a company, and this, I talk to my students every class about this. It's like, look, here's the scenario. You take a great job out of school, you get married, you buy a house, you have a kid, you have a mortgage, and then the company you're working for wants you to work on a product that you think is unethical. What do you do? And we have the discussion about what do you do in that scenario? Because I think that has happened a lot. And people who, wow, now I'm married, I have a kid, I have a mortgage, and do I quit? What do I do? And I'll fast forward. I try to help my students understand, yeah, you quit. Well, you have the conversation that we shouldn't be doing this. This is bad. And if they say, no, you're doing this, say, great, you resign. And then guess what? You're not going to have a problem finding a new job. You talk about your ethical position and you left XYZ company, and I will help you find a job, by the way, students. And a good company is going to see that as a plus, not a negative. The fact that you wouldn't apply your skills and your talent and your time and waste the days of your life on something that was not ethically sound is a benefit, not a distraction or detraction from you being a great candidate. So that's kind of the point that I want my students, that is the point I want my students to understand, is have the courage to walk away. Don't do the projects. You're not as trapped as you think you are. You can get a job very quickly and still make the mortgage payment.
Yeah, it's a great point. That's a really great point. And happened to me personally. I was my first job at a PhD. I was at a big consulting firm, and they sort of, in the interviews, they sold me on the promises of applying behavioral science in a big giant global consulting firm, and I was swayed and I'm very impressed. And within 3 months, I was like, this is bullshit. This is awful. I came from like academia where it's like, I'm curious about something. I'm going to go run an experiment and then I'm going to write up the results. It was a big wake up call. And fortunately for me, I realized that there was a moment that I was like, wow, is this the real world? Is this what all companies are like? And it's not, I've now learned.
Yeah.
But I made the decision after 3 months. We also realized my wife was pregnant. We were moving to a new house in a new city.
I just told your story, Nick. That was your story. Keep going.
How do you think I was crying? Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, next time in my class, I'm going to call you and say, Nick, give us a scenario here. Because, yes.
I got them all up my sleeve. And I made what was at the time probably such a foolish decision to leave the good paying, what might have been considered a foolish decision, to leave the good paying job, even though we had a first kid on the way and a new mortgage. And to be honest, it was hard and it was stressful at the time. But now I look back and things are good.
What did you tell yourself? What did you tell your wife? Talk to me so I'll add more nuance to my future teaching. How did you? Yeah.
Luckily, my wife, my partner, was so supportive, and she's like, and in fact, it was her suggestion that I leave.
Wow.
Because it was like the classic consulting. You have to work for 80 hours. You're nothing to us. We're going to basically abuse
Yeah.
you as an employee, and we're not going to care about you, and your own autonomy and sort of own needs. And I would come back just totally, beside myself, and I was like, I don't know what to do. And it was her suggestion to leave. And so really with feeling that support from your life partner is
Yeah.
all I really needed to make that big change and that
That's
big
great. That's
yeah,
great.
and luckily there was something that happened. Like a client came to me, and my first client, which was the Major League Soccer, MLS, which is this big group, and they ended up being my first client for the first 6 months of that transition, which helped tremendously. So
Oh, good.
yeah.
Good for you. Well, you caused me to think of another instance, and this doesn't relate so much with behavior, but career.
Mhm.
I didn't intend to be, but they recruited me. I was the research director for a large consumer electronics brand. I was the research director for the US for them. And I would meet with a lot of potential partners. And I remember meeting with one of the potential partners, and they were suggesting that we mislead people about what we were doing. And they presented all these business reasons. And I was like, no, we're not doing that. And later with my team, I said, look, if they're suggesting we be dishonest as we present this, or was it CES or something like that? I said, how do we know they're being honest with us? We are not working with them. They're off. They're on our blacklist. We're not interacting with them. Because that's important. And for me, as a scientist, it's all about integrity. If I'm not truthful, there goes my whole career. There's, and that's not who I am. I'm a person of, you make claims accurately and you qualify the claims when needed. And just, I guess the career advice is, if somebody you're working with or potentially working with doesn't have integrity, run.
Yeah.
Because you may think that, in this position, it's like, oh, we'll together say this thing. And then it's like, then how can I trust you? So nope, you're not a partner. If that's how you think, there's no way I can throw in with you or build my career by being connected to you. So for me, that's, and probably a lot of people succeed by manipulating things, but, we are trained as, researchers and quantitative folks that the data is the data, and the way you run stuff and the way you analyze things and report it is a certain way, and to not do so is a serious violation, and you should be kicked out of being a scientist if you violate that. So sorry for that little rant. Okay.
No,
sorry.
It was like a little therapy session for me. It was great.
Okay, good. I'll send you my invoice.
It actually reminds me of, I'm really into this new psychedelics research, sort of the resurgence of psychedelics. And this aside, I'll be brief. We'll see if I'll be brief. And they had a panel of the leading, I think they're at NYU and with Johns Hopkins.
Mm-hmm.
And these are serious scientists. And they just kept saying over and over in the panel, we're we have a hypothesis and we're going to design these well-controlled studies. And the one line they kept saying is, we're just going to follow the data. We're going to follow the data. We're going to follow the data. Because the interviewer just kept, the non-scientist kept saying, kind of like those headlines, those clickbaity headlines that all of a sudden psychedelics are going to cure every evil of the world. And these scientists were just saying, no, look, we're going to run one study and we're going to take one study at a time, and then we're going to draw certain conclusions based off those, but we're not going to speak past the data or past whatever evidence is in front of us. I think that thinking is so important to whatever job you do. I think there needs to be more of that.
And sometimes you find things you don't want to find. I was on a meeting this morning where the topic was trust and credibility, and I did a bunch of research about what makes websites credible. This was like 2000, 2001. And the finding, we had thousands of people involved in a study, and there were 7 factors that fell out of the data. And the number one predictor of whether somebody thought a website was credible was the visual design, which was not what we wanted. I was like, oh no. It wasn't about the information quality. It wasn't about the retraction policy. It wasn't about these kinds of things we were hoping and optimistic to find. But it's like, there it is. And so we published it and said, and we called it, I think we called it Design Look.
Yeah.
And then once we looked at it, it was like, oh, that makes sense. For thousands of years, good-looking people have been more credible than those who are not. And yeah, there's reasons that people will generalize around the visuals. But it was sad. And it was kind of sad to publish that. It's like, we're not thrilled with this result. But what the data shows is if it looks good, then people believe that it's credible. Bam.
Yeah. And yeah, that's a great example, because we, as scholars and as we care about this stuff, we're like, we hope that people deliberate, and we hope that people
I know
care about the nuance. But it's like, no, color blue. Ooh, I love that. Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. Anyway, but then, once you see it, it's like, okay, I get it. This is human nature. And, there you have it. That's one of the shortcuts that we take for evaluating credibility is the visual. The first impression is makes a huge difference.
I'm really fascinated. I work with a lot of like web designers and web developers, and I'm psychologically, it's so interesting. There's this of the website, of that landing page. What is the sort of brand feel? What is, on my own website, I went for the real pictures of real humans and like pictures of cities and roads, which used to be a thing. But then you go to other ones, even similar people in my field, and it's all animations. It's very like kind of cartoony, and I feel that's a relatively new thing. So I'm sure there's research out there, and if not, here's a dissertation for a PhD student to look at the effects of that on trust.
And so that was that component, that factor. I think we called it technical capacity, or there was a technical aspect. So I think the whizziness helps, not as much as the basic design. But the fact that websites become responsive and animations use more may boost. But then, and this is a bigger question. I mean, we didn't do a year by year study of are the credibility assessments changing based on these features? But yes, they probably are. As you get tired of seeing these big animations and you are less impressed with it, then that's not going to have as a strong effect. It's not going to convey expertise like it did when that kind of thing was new. And when it comes to credibility, you've got the two components of that are trustworthiness and expertise. And technical expertise appears that maps into how we assess the credibility of the content on the website.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, BJ, I have I could keep you for hours, but I won't. I have one final question.
This went fast.
I know. I have pages and pages of notes and questions I didn't get to ask you, but I'll have one more just to be sort of considerate of your time. So this is a question I ask all guests. It's the only one sort of standard question. BBB, the big behavioral brainstorm. Of all the issues that we see today, which one, if you had to choose only one, do you think could stand to benefit from a psychological or behavioral intervention? Or insight? Doesn't have to be in this.
Yeah. Oh, there's so many right now.
The world's on fire, but you can only.
I mean, my mind. I've got a little bit tunnel vision here. I'm doing a research project with Stanford Medicine where we're helping older adults who have mild to moderate depression, and that was a certain number before COVID, and it's much, much bigger now. And so that's just top of mind right now. Now it turns out that the first study we did worked really well, and it wasn't as hard. I mean, it's tiny habits plus behavioral activation. We're seeing statistical results as measured on pre-test, post-test on the PHQ-8, which is an assessment of level of depression. I really, really like that project. Millions and millions of older adults need it, plus not just older adults. We picked older adults because of COVID and the restrictions. And so super important project. I'm frustrated with how slow it is. As you know, academic stuff works slow. And with my industry hat on, it's like, bam, let's launch the scale tomorrow. Let's roll this out. Let's start helping people. We can still study the effectiveness and study how to improve it. But I'm not the PI on that study. I was invited in on it. But that is, people, it's a tough time, and it's going to continue to be even after COVID. And there's going to be issues, from either anxiety or loneliness or a feeling of loss of control that has impact on people's levels of depression. And that just I'm just so glad to be working on that study and trying to move the needle on what we can do and help older adults to lessen their depression without using drugs to do so, because drugs create side effects and other complications. So yeah, depression, and especially depression among older adults.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you for doing that work and your collaborators. It's the type of work we need to see being done, especially now as we continue the struggles of COVID and entering into the holiday season and all that.
But I'll give quick advice to everybody out there who has older adults in your life. First of all, call your parents every day. That's not part of the study. That's what I've been doing. It's great. Your parents love it. Okay, so call your parents every day. And I'm taking this from Gretchen Rubin. She said, like, in her family, they have this policy that it's okay to be boring. So talk about boring, what you think is boring stuff with your parents. Tell them about details. I'm going to predict they're going to like it.
I like that.
What is supported by the study is encourage older adults to do at least one behavior. In our study, they're doing 4 behaviors, activities every day that they enjoy. Painting, reading poetry, listening to music. And even if they think it's not going to be effective, help people identify. And often it's behaviors or activities from their past that they've let go. So they bring back painting or piano playing or something like that. So that, I'm thinking, is the crux. It's like creating habits out of these pleasurable activities. So if I had to kind of fast forward and say, how do you help your parents or aunts or uncle or grandparents on this? Help them say, hey, what did you love to do as a kid that maybe you start doing again? And if they say painting, buy a paint set, send it to them or whatever. So that is, this is me getting ahead of ourselves in the research and suggesting solutions that are practical and people can do immediately.
If it's a type 2 error, what's the harm? Not your mom has a paint set, and at least she gave it a try, even if the data don't bear out on that. No, that is great.
Yeah, we're publishing. We've done a poster on it, and we're publishing the small study in one way. Stay tuned. The PI and the whole team is eager to publish as broadly and share as broadly as we can.
Great.
Once we get more confidence in the program. So we have to get at least another pilot.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, BJ, thanks again. And
thank you.
I think you'll just have to come back on next year when all these data come in and
that you have would be fun, and we can geek out a bit more.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again. Cheers.
Hey, Nick here once more. A final farewell note before ending. All the show notes, links to papers, resources, and materials mentioned in this episode can be found on the BS podcast page of The Behaviorist, where you can find all episodes and lots of other interesting and easy to apply sciencey stuff. Just head on over to www.behaviorist.biz/BS podcast. The show is edited and co-produced by Laura Christine and Noel Rain, and visual artwork, banners, and animated GIFs created by the talented Iris Deng of dengit.org. That's DENGIT.org. Definitely go and check it out. Lastly, if you'd like to join me in the mission of spreading the good BS word, remember to rate and review the show on iTunes or wherever else you get your podcast fix. Quite a bit of work goes into these episodes, and a little love would go a long way. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, remember, keep your facts ugly and your hypotheses beautiful.